Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, I guarantee we have a conversation that all of us need to hear. We're here with James Dress. Now, James, you are the Chief Growth Officer at Corus. You're actually a two-time Chief Growth Officer. You're a former Chief Sales Officer. So you had a lot of executive experience, but right now, you've been brought in, you're in charge of the entire go-to-market strategy. And in your thoughts on how all of us as C-suite executives need to be thinking about an evolution in our roles and how we think about addressing the market and going to market, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Basically, stop burning your TAM. Stop doing the kinds of things that we've always done in the past. Let's think a little bit better, a little more evolved about what we're doing and how we're approaching the market. But before we jump in there, I'd love to give you just an opportunity to take a minute and give us a little bit more about your background before we get started.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot for the invitation. This is exciting. The things that you mentioned, I'm very passionate about. And my background started in marketing. And so I was very focused on the marketing, even in fast moving consumer goods, and then in healthcare. I had the opportunity to join a couple of startups, SaaS startups, which I think that's really where you have to understand sales funnels as not just the lead gen, not just the top of the funnel, but really the whole funnel. And I think that was instrumental in helping me to be where I am today, is that shift a bit from just marketing, generating leads, generating awareness, supporting the business, launching products, to really understanding the whole sales funnel. And just a couple of things. I love sailing. I'm originally American and lived in Barcelona for the last 25 years. So that's just a couple of things about me personally.
I think that's a whole other podcast because I'd love to hear more about that. But let's start out here. I want to talk about this evolved role. And you've been in marketing, you've been in sales, you're now over the go-to-market strategy, it includes customer success, everything. So you have to have played and now have all roles, all perspectives wrapped up and rolled into one. What's your initial thoughts on what this evolution in the role needs to be?
Interesting question, because I think it kind of happened organically in my case, right? Because in the SaaS companies and the startups, these companies don't have the budgets to have several C-level people. You have a C-level person. I think that's why the whole growth moniker came up, is these startups, a lot of them are SaaS. You're saying, hey, we need somebody that's in charge of marketing. We need somebody that's in charge of business development. We need somebody that's in charge of customer acquisition. We need somebody that's in charge of revenue. We need somebody that's, and so then growth, and this whole growth moniker came up. But in my case, I think it was just curiosity, to be honest with you, because it was, okay, how can we generate leads? I think one of the first startups I was in, was an education med tech SaaS. How do we generate leads? How do we get in front of customers? We got over that hump. Now, what's the customer journey? What are the metrics that we're using? How can we start projecting leads to ARR, MRR, this type of things, churn? And all of a sudden, okay, this is different than just the lead generation, top of the funnel type thing. So that's what my role here is. It was originally chief marketing officer, and I knew this was going to happen when, after now 11 months, they said, hey, you're really the growth person. I said, yeah, I know. I know. That's fine. We'll just change that title. That's no problem.
The perspective and the evolution that we met before we were talking, you posed a question that I've never thought of before. And I'm a former B2B SaaS founder myself. My clients and the companies and the folks that come on here are executives from SaaS companies. And typically when we're going after different rounds of funding and everything, and the VCs and the private equity firms, they hate it when we say this, but we always do. If we could just get 1% of a TAM, right? This TAM is this like massive sprawling thing. And you're like, I wonder if what we're doing is just burning our TAM. Right? And we're not going to get a chance to go back. This challenge of burning the TAM, what does that mean? And how do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this was something this happened to me in my last company, and I just never really thought of it. I think it's a bit of an ostrich head in the sand type thing. I just want to start saying, how can I get X percentage of my TAM? So I just have a marketing strategy that's just trying to get as much as possible. But the last company I was in, we really were hitting a lot of our TAM in it. I started thinking about it. Okay, now I've gone through the round once in this geography. What do I do now? I need to generate leads. What do I do now? Yeah, you need to just keep generating leads. Yeah, I've talked to everybody. I've contacted everybody. How many emails do you get that are people that are these engines that basically contact you and it looks like a personalized email, but it's not. If you're using, let's say, your traditional methods to get in front of your customers or potential customers, there's a time where you will run out. You will run out. I guarantee you, you will run out. And then when you run out, then you're going to say to your BDMs or your BDRs and your marketing team, okay, now I need more leads. Okay, yeah, I've talked to everybody. What do you want me to do? You want me to email them again? You want me to call them again? And I thought, wow, I would say we're being a bit reckless. I don't want to use words that are completely negative because I don't want to have anybody to feel like what they're doing is not right, because we all face the same challenges, but it was a bit reckless. And I feel the same challenge here. Now we have to be very careful. You want to make small mistakes often, but make sure the reiteration every time is a bit more thought. There's a bit more reflection. In the sector I'm in now, we have our end customer dentists, and there's a finite number of those. You can go through and you can identify who they are. If you say, okay, I've contacted 75% of them, but I only have a 20% market share, that other 50%, can I still get them? Could I still potentially be part of their choice set? So there's two things there. One is making sure that when we say, okay, we've talked to 75%, how have we talked to them? Have we done it in a way that still keeps the door open for me to come back to them? And the second question is, okay, the first round didn't work or is not working as I expected. What do I do now, right?
The typical SaaS company, and we all do this, and as a SaaS founder, I'm guilty. We're so in love with what we do. We're all convinced that as soon as they know, the floodgates open, right? Wow, when they know, that's just going to open up all kinds of opportunities for us. And that's just not how it works. But because of that mentality, and because we're thought leaders of our own tech, our own product, our own babies, that's what we talk about. You started talking about building trust with thought leadership. I could send 15 different emails of pure thought leadership and never burn my TAM. I could send 15 emails about me and potentially burn my TAM pretty quickly, right?
Yeah.
There's this balance. So this, like, in your mind, what is the importance of building trust through thought leadership? Because thought leadership is all about them. It's all about helping them and their challenges, right? What is your thought about?
In the healthcare industry, where your end customer is our doctors, you need to help them basically feel more confident about the treatments that they're giving. So they're actually looking for that. There's training and education that you can do. So I would say the thought leadership challenge is there, but it's not, okay, what is thought leadership? Now in SaaS, the thought leadership is, yes, you need to build trust through thought leadership, full stop. The challenge is, okay, what is that thought leadership? So we always go back to, okay, if I can help them understand what their problem is and give them insight on how to solve their problem, I've got it made. That's my thought leadership.
Right.
That's the ABC of content marketing and account-based marketing. We know that, right? But the actual, what is that thought leadership? And are you really understanding the problem, or are you really hoping that your software fixes a problem that you think they might have? So to answer your first question, yes, it's super important. The second question is, I think just assuming you're going to be able to reach that thought leadership threshold, that's a big challenge.
I have to tell you, because I talked to a lot of folks on the podcast about this, and one of their biggest challenges is coming up with relevant thought leadership. And this is well documented, right? That 70% of B2B buyers think that the thought leadership that they read has no value for them. Has no value for them, right? In fact, Forbes did a big study, outside company, wrote a big article. They gave B2B marketing, in particular thought leadership, a D-. Think about this. If your kid kept coming home with a D-, what would you be doing?
Yeah.
It'd be like, that's unacceptable. Unacceptable. As an industry, we are accepting that, right? So how do we overcome this, right? If the evolution in our roles is really thinking about our customers and thinking about how we serve them first, their challenges are this. We help them on this. And this is really important. This is really important, but it's only a part of what they have as their challenges, right? How do we evolve? How do we not get the D-? How do we not burn our TAM by just selling? What are the kind of things that we need to be able to do to overcome these challenges?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one thing that I've seen that does work, you have to be very careful and it has to be in an early stage, is actually get some customer feedback on how your product should be used and developed. And that takes a lot of humility, one. It takes a lot of reiteration, and you have to be a lot more sophisticated, because I've tried this and it actually has worked. And it's actually getting customers involved and say, hey, I really am interested in what you have to say. I think this product does this. What do you think? Really develop relationships at an early stage, which SaaS people don't have time for relationships. We have time for lead, conversation, demo, subscription. That's what we have time for. Why? Because you said it, VCs, and what do VCs like to do? They want to see metrics. And they want to see how fast those metrics can be accomplished. If I had the silver bullet, Steve, I would share with you and I can make a lot of money. But I think really trying to develop some key relationships at the beginning of the go-to-market stage to really involve them. And for two reasons. One, you start gaining advocacy, right? And two, you really understand on a one-to-one basis how your product is helping them. Because otherwise, if it's a sales call, let's be honest with you, you're selling. Even though we do consultative selling where you ask questions and everything, at the end of the day, there's a pressure to sell. And that pressure usually trumps any real conversation about the problem.
Well, I think you actually had a tremendous answer there, because what you said is the key is talking to your customers, right? That's the key. They're the highest authority in the business, right? In fact, Amazon has that. I don't know if you heard about the empty chair policy, where there's an empty chair in every meeting. Now, I guess a virtual chair in the virtual meeting, right? But the empty chair is there to represent the customer. If the customer were sitting here with us today, how would that influence what we're doing? So you've got to have these real conversations with customers. In fact, Gong, who is the #1 company for recording sales calls, did a big study. And they found out of thousands and thousands of sales conversations, the sales rep talks 2/3 to 3/4 of the time. You're not learning a lot. You're doing all the talking. So there's a barrier there. If you're selling me, I'm not going to divulge all my secrets. So what's been a consistent thread throughout this podcast when I ask these kinds of questions is they say, here's my playbook. As a CMO, I'll come in, I'll call 15, 20, 25 customers to start out, because that's unencumbered by the pressure of a sales conversation. That's a real conversation to have. The problem is we're too busy. We can't keep doing that. But I had a conversation on the podcast last week with a 3-time B2B CMO, and she is a value accelerator advisor for Goldman Sachs. Like, they just put $100 million investment into one of the companies that she's advising. And she said, Steve, there's nothing more important than having ongoing conversations with your customers or your ICP. She said, foundationally, it's the most important thing that you can do. So when you said, that's where I had my ears perked up, and you said, we need to have these conversations that we don't typically have. That's the challenge. How do we do it?
I think, first of all, it's about initiative. You have to want to do it, which is, I think I told you this before, that's not a comfortable thing for a lot of people to do. Let's be honest, calling up customers, and it depends on how big your organization is and who are the customers, how close, not proximity, but how close can you be to the customer? You know, can you just call somebody up and talk to them? Are they going to give you time? So there's a bit of, let's say, reflection on that. And I think that's my first challenge. I'm a salesperson, but let's be honest. How do you structure calling customers? So we're super busy. And another thing we have to realize, I think this is interesting. We are not their priority. We are not our customer's priority.
Right.
And I harp on that all the time. We think we are because we're our priority, but we're not our customer's priority. You said that. You said you went from this to this. I think it's even this. We're their priority if we solve a need and they have a problem in the moment. Then we're their priority, but we're not their priority. I think the first thing is you have to want to do it. And then the second thing is, who's on the ground talking to customers every day? Hey, what are you hearing? Could I talk to this person? Because if you ask your sales team, again, we talk about growth, you are the growth person, but usually there are salespeople making the calls, making the demos, visiting the customers or what have you. You know, what are you hearing? I'm hearing this. Okay, can I talk to a couple of your customers? And then you come back with a lot of information. And then the second thing is, I think we don't want to hear what the customer says. What if the customer says something that completely floors our strategy? What happens then?
Shoot.
Yeah, I have this idea, I have this value proposition, and I have this go-to-market strategy. And okay, I really need to talk to the customers now. Okay, let's go talk to the customer. And the customer says, sorry, this just isn't interesting to me. Okay, I'm fine. Talk to another person. You want to know this. At the end of the day, everybody would like to know this, but that doesn't fit into your plans.
No, that never does. And here's what I think is interesting. I talk to a lot of CMOs that have an imposter syndrome. And they talk about how hard it is to earn a seat at the table, the executive table. And what we usually end up talking about is if there is one highest authority in your business, and it's the customer, it's your ICP, right? The people that you're prospecting with every single day, then if you represent their voice, does that not give you the most important seat at the table? Not just a seat at the table, right? So this is something that the company needs. This is something that as growth officers, executives of the company, we need, even if it's hearing the hard things. There's not one SaaS company that hasn't pivoted. I guarantee it, right? If when we talk about in our exec meetings, we talk about at board meetings, there's always a pivot. And sometimes that pivot is on the growth scale, right? As we're growing and we're taking on larger clients and different challenges, we have to pivot, right? But if we're not having that voice in our current go-to-market strategies and how we're pivoting, how we're innovating. I just talked to, on the podcast 2 weeks ago, a CMO CRO combination. They both came on together. And they were at a company that they were involved at when they had 5 million in ARR. Now they're at 100 million in ARR 5 years later. And they're on track to go to 200, 250 million ARR. And they said fundamentally, really who we are each year has changed dramatically. And so therefore, what we do for our clients changes dramatically, right? And because of what they need for us. The golden truth is, our ICP is complex and they're always changing.
I think the key thing is get out and talk to your customer, or at least have your ear to the rail. I would say very on a consistent basis. And I think, of course, that's what you always hear. And like you said, but it's not easy. You have other things. You got to launch products. You got to report. You have to do campaign. There's just a lot of stuff going on to actually take time. Probably the most important thing, but it's also probably what takes proportionally the most amount of time, is to just go out and talk to a couple of customers.
It's interesting. So I was a chief sales officer before and chief growth officer now. There's things that we always have to say no to, right? There's those tantalizing deals that we know are going to help us hit our quota, but we know aren't the perfect fit for the company. They're the ones that are going to churn. They're the ones going to eat up resources. Those are the ones that we're not only going to churn, but they're not going to expand. 30 to 40% of our revenues every year should be from customer expansion. We know there's things we need to say no to, but as a CMO, we have a hard time saying no to all those requests that come in. They eat up our time, that take us away from the priorities like talking to our customers, right? I was a fractional CMO for a year, and every year when I came in, I would get the laundry list of what never got accomplished. Here's the sea of tactics, Steve, that as the CMO, operates as a CMO in our company, we would like you to handle. And nobody had prioritized them. They weren't aligned with a go-to-market strategy. But as CMOs, we have to be able to say no. Not everything is important to do, right?
Yep.
And as long as we're all in alignment on what we're supposed to do, then I think that's going to help. I've interviewed 150 C-suite executives. I learn every single day from folks like you, right? Because we all have bits and pieces of how we should put it together. But I guarantee you the consistency that's run through there is being connected to our customers. I've never talked to an executive that said that was a bad idea. In fact, that even said it wasn't a priority.
I think it's a good point. I think if you look at yourself in the mirror every morning, you say, have I done enough to talk to my customers? And usually it's probably no. And again, it's the most important thing, but it's also a delicate thing. It's difficult, and it's It's not a lot of people just don't like to do it. Let's be honest. There's some people that just prefer their area of work. And a lot of us come in and we're told this is what the customer says, this is what the customer wants. Fine. I think that can get you going for the first few months to start thinking about priorities. But at some time you got to test what you're doing with the customer. Is it really on track?
And one of the things that my takeaway from this conversation is, I hadn't really thought about it like that. Two things. One is, oh my gosh, if we're not learning from our customers and helping them, we're just selling to them, like through our demand gen campaigns, through our SDR outbound, through everything, we're just burning TAM. If we're not demonstrating how we're helping on a consistent basis and we're just selling on a consistent basis, we are going to burn our limited TAM. I never thought about it that way. I think that's a really good way to think about it. But I'd love to ask, if of everything that we've talked about here today, if there was one thing that you wanted the executives that are watching to take away, what would that one thing be?
Before we just had that conversation, Steve, my first thought was, understand your main growth levers, right? So I was thinking, okay, you talk about the funnel, you talk about new customer acquisition, cross-selling, upselling. And I think that, let's say I have 2 points, or point A and point B. But point A, I would still say understand your growth funnel, your growth levers. So spend time and resources, because another thing we forget is we're one person. You might have a team. I have a pretty big team right now, but at the end of the day, I need to help them structure them on where they're going. And I'm one resource, right? So I'm a finite resource myself. So I have to think about, where am I putting my effort and where do I want to put my team to put their effort? So in our business, we believe that right now the biggest opportunity is cross-selling. But all of our mechanisms are set up in marketing to incorporate new customers. So there's a bit of a misalignment. It's not that big, but really where our growth is going to come from is cross-selling. We just have our TAM, and that's another thing, is our TAM. We look at it as, okay, in our TAM, how much penetration do we have in each customer? And in our case, there's still a lot of room to grow. So that was the first thing. But I think the second thing I would say, and that kind of goes, I think they're a bit related, is make sure you're talking to your customers and have a mechanism to do that. Build that into your weekly habits or monthly habits as a CMO. I think probably on a weekly basis, I want to talk to 2 or 3 customers. And I think I wanted to interject both points because I prepared the first one. We didn't really talk about it, but that's a big one for me. But I think the second point, based on what we've spent the last 10 minutes talking about, is, make sure you're really having good conversations with your customers.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that we can't just let slip through the cracks. James, it's the vast amount of conversation we've had here is going to spark all kinds of questions, I know, from the audience. Would it be appropriate that I gave out a link to your LinkedIn profile that people could reach out if they had questions?
Of course.
In the podcast?
Of course.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I cannot underscore the value of your marketing, your chief sales officer, your chief growth officer background in sharing and just kind of putting a point of view on, as growth officers, all of us really inside of our companies, what we need to be focused on, what we need to be thinking on and evolving. And I will forever now think about and talk to the folks on the podcast about, how are you not burning your TAM? Because I think that's a really good question. Yeah, they're really.
I'm sure there's people out there that have thought about it. And they'll probably say, well, this is an easy fix. You can do this. And that's probably the case. And I'm sure there's smarter people than me out there that have already thought about this and are addressing it. But it was a revelation to me. You just think about, there's an unlimited number. Until you're selling to the whole market, which you never do, it's just unlimited. I came to the conclusion that's just not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. James, thank you for coming on and sharing all of these insights. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Steve. Thanks for having me.